Hello, you're watching Coronavirus Catch Up. I'm Jordan Kenny. Welcome to the programme. We're live tonight on the BBC News NI website and Facebook page and on the BBC iPlayer for the next 25 minutes or so. Thanks for tuning in, however you're joining us. So the Executive has been meeting today for its latest review of Northern Ireland's COVID-19 restrictions. And unlike last week's review, we've now got confirmation of the reopening of indoor bars, restaurants and other hospitality. You can head round to your mates. Holidays are back on, sort of, and some other good news in there as well. So let's take a proper look at what's been agreed. Now, at this point, it's probably easier to go through what you can't do rather than what you can, but let's give it a go. Like I said, we're going to be able to meet people indoors, so you can head round to your friend's house, but there can only be 6 people from 2 households. This next one is especially welcome news after the weather we've been having today, but eating your dinner outside in the rain is not the vibe we're after. You'll be able to eat indoors. From Monday, you can go indoors with groups of up to 6 people from 6 separate households if you're heading out for a meal or for a pint. The remainder of the tourism sector, so that includes hotels, bed and breakfasts, will reopen as well. And for those of you who have been asking, wedding receptions and post-funeral events have also been given the go-ahead. Fans are heading back to sports grounds. Up to 500 spectators will be allowed to watch outdoor sports events in person. For those of you still at school, you'll be able to get back to extracurricular activities, and the rules also allow for sports fixtures to be held between schools. Museums and libraries are reopening, and lastly for this date, the advice to stay local will be removed. Well, that's where we're at with all of that. However, there's also been news on the travel front today, and our political reporter Jane McCormack is with me now to tell us a bit more. Jane, for a lot of people, the restrictions I've just gone through there, they affect our day-to-day lives. But increasingly, as we come into the summer months, people are thinking about travelling, they're thinking about getting away on holidays. The Executive has approved this new traffic light system for us to travel. Take us through that.
I think the first thing to say, Jordan, is with the weather that we're having today, I think everybody in Northern Ireland is thinking about a holiday. But
yeah, our minds have headed that direction.
For some time, it is not going to be business as usual, because you talked about this traffic light system for travel. So basically there are 3 stages, as you'd expect with traffic lights. So it's green, amber and red. And what does that mean? Well, if a country is on the green list, that means that you are okay to go there. You won't need to quarantine when you come back. You do, however, have to take a COVID test before you go, up to 72 hours beforehand, and you have to take a test on the second day that you come back. So that's for green countries. Amber countries, the advice around this has been a little confusing from the government, because technically it's not illegal to go to countries that are on the amber list, but the advice is that you shouldn't be going because the risk of transmission of the virus in those countries is still higher. And if you do decide to go, not only do you have to take those COVID tests, the same ones, one before you go, 2 when you get back, so you've got one to take on day 2 and day 8, but you also have to self-isolate at your home for 10 days when you get back. And so the third one then, the red list, I think everybody has heard about this by now. These are the countries really where you should not be going to at all unless there is an essential reason why you need to be there. And if you are coming back to Northern Ireland from one of those countries, such as India, for example, then you have to go into mandatory hotel quarantine when you get back. And if you are coming back through London or Dublin first, well, then you have to stay in mandatory quarantine in a hotel in one of those locations before you can then get back to Northern Ireland. And I should say all of that comes at a pretty hefty price, because hotel quarantine costs about £1,700. So it's something to bear in mind before you start travelling. And we know that with everybody looking at flights again, flights are going to get more expensive. And also there's all the added paperwork and the cost as well of trying to get a test.
Yeah, a lot of extra expenses to think about now when travelling. But that's how the system will all work, Jane. So what about the countries that have actually made the list? So the green list, that's the one that everybody will probably be looking at first and foremost. So where will we be able to travel to, free from the shackles of isolation when we return?
I'm not sure people are going to be marking spots on their maps with some of these locations, because there are only 12 for a start. So we know there's Australia, New Zealand. Now, they are not letting UK holidaymakers visit at the moment, so you can basically scratch that off your list. Then there's a lot of the kind of the remote islands, the likes of the Faroe Islands, the Falklands, St. Helena, South Georgia, and the South Sandwich Islands, which I'd never heard of before today. But then there's also Portugal and Iceland. Now, those two locations are probably going to be, I guess, of most interest to holidaymakers here, because we know as well that Portugal from Friday has started to let holidaymakers arrive so long as they have evidence of that negative COVID test before they come. So I think those are probably realistically the two destinations that people will be looking at short term, and the government is saying that it's going to keep this green list under review with the intention of trying to widen it out as we move into the summer.
Jane, funny you mention it, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. You said you'd never heard of it. Well, I'm not a geographer, but I was also curious about the South Sandwich Islands and where they might be. So buckle up, I've got a bit of a geography lesson coming for you here. I'm going to put on my best teacher voice. South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands are a British overseas territory in the southern Atlantic Ocean. They're a remote collection of islands right down under South America. And as you mentioned, Jane, since it's one of 10 places on the green list, people might be thinking about visiting. It's not as easy as hopping on a flight. You can only get there by sea. There's no accommodation ashore, which is why it's a popular place for cruise ships to stop. But one thing to bear in mind, though, is that there's no search and rescue or emergency services there. So you literally are in isolation, a term that we're all very familiar with. We're not done yet. 11 volcanic islands make up South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, with South Georgia having an average population of just 30. And those 30 people do actually have to share the islands with an estimated 1 million chinstrap penguins, which you can see on the screen right now. So if you were thinking of taking a summer holiday there, you'll be disappointed to hear that the average temperature is about -1 degrees Celsius at this time of the year. Although given today's weather, that doesn't sound too far from what we've been having today, because it's absolutely Baltic. But if you did decide to go, one benefit is that it uses pounds sterling, so you wouldn't have to worry about exchanging your money at the airport. So Gian, I'm fully expecting to see your Instagram awash with pictures of your holidays in the South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands in the next few weeks.
As much as I would love to take a selfie with some of those penguins, I'm not sure they would appreciate flocks of tourists from Northern Ireland coming over just because we're desperate to get on a holiday. So I'll hold off for now.
Yeah. Well, now that we all know where the South Sandwich Islands are and that they're not a trendy restaurant in the Cathedral Quarter, let's get to some questions. James is asking for clarity on what tests are needed and when. So he specifically mentions the Amber List. So let's start there. I know you did mention a bit of this, but if you were to travel to a country on the Amber List, what tests would you be needing?
So if you're going to somewhere on that Amber List, as you say, you have to take the PCR COVID tests as opposed to the lateral flow tests. So these are ones that I think have to be booked through kind of the official Department of Health website, and you'll have to provide evidence of that before you go. So you've got to take one 72 hours in advance before you intend to depart. And then when you come back to Northern Ireland, prior to arriving, you have to go online through this link that the executive has set up, and you have to book COVID tests then for day 2 when you're home and day 8 as well. Those are not free. They do cost money. However, what the executive has said today is because they have added Portugal to the green list, there was some discussion originally about keeping Portugal on the amber list, but now that they've moved it to the green list, they're still saying that they want people coming back from Portugal to get a COVID test on day 8 as well, but the executive will provide that one free of charge. So that should maybe help some holidaymakers if they were planning their kind of journey to Portugal later this month or later in the year.
Yeah, well, you mentioned those costs there, Jane, and you know, it is something to be considered. Just out of interest, we did a quick scan earlier before we came on, and you can buy a PCR test, but that's going to set you back about 85 quid. So when you think about getting one of those before you go, then another one before you come back, and then another one when you are actually home, you're coming close to nearly, £300 per person. So these costs are definitely something that people are going to have to consider when they're traveling, isn't it?
Yeah, and also it's not just about the costs. You think of what it's like when you planned to go on holiday before the pandemic. I I'm already not a big fan of airports just because of the amount of time you have to queue, the amount of security you have to go through, the paperwork you have to bring. So already you've got your passport, you've got your ticket. You're now going to also have a passenger locator form with you that you have to bring before you go. And you also have to have one of those filled in for when you're coming back to Northern Ireland, as well as then thinking about these PCR tests and making sure you've got the documentation of that before you even get into kind of any of the rules around self-isolating if you're coming from one of those countries where you have to do that. So there is a lot to think about. There's the extra costs, there's the added paperwork, and I think that will probably put some people off going abroad for a little bit longer.
Well, one thing that we've been asked about is vaccine passports and how to prove your vaccine status. From earlier this week in England, you could get proof of your vaccination on the NHS app, and Wales is due to introduce a similar scheme as well later this month. We asked the Health Department what the plans were for this in Northern Ireland, and here's what they said. They told us that the NHS app uses information from NHS England computer systems. It's not directly compatible with the Northern Ireland health and social care systems. Work is currently ongoing across the devolved administrations in regards to vaccine and testing certification in order to support international travel when restrictions are eased. So that's what the Department of Health have to say. So hopefully we'll hear more about their plans in the next few weeks, but it does sound like they are working on something. But moving on from that, Jane, we have a question sent in here about a different mode of traveling in a car, a lot more familiar to everyone. The question asks, can I have a passenger from another household in my car?
I think the answer is probably yes. There was never any definitive rule stopping people from having others in their car. The guidance was that you should only be travelling with members of your own household. However, I think given where we are going now, as we start to see the end of lockdown, really, I think the advice would be if you plan to carpool with somebody, just kind of follow the public health advice, ensure there's ventilation with windows down, make sure people are wearing masks if you feel that's safer. So it's kind of all that usual guidance and common sense around some of the rules, but there's never been anything definitive.
And I will say as well, tonight, if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to get involved in the comment section if you have any questions for Jane on the restrictions, or if there's anything you'd like to know, just get in touch on the comment section and we'll try our best to get to that. But Jane, this next question has been sent in from Barbara, who is in England. And it kind of flips the perspective around a bit, because we've plenty of questions sent in asking if people from Northern Ireland can holiday in Great Britain. But Barbara is asking, are people in England, let's get to the next page, permitted to visit Northern Ireland for a holiday after next week?
So the answer, in short, seems to be yes, because we know up until now the advice around travel to Northern Ireland has been only to come if it is essential. However, we're seeing a lot of that change from Monday, because you've got the international travel aspect of it, but you've also got some changes to the guidance around travel within the common travel area, which we know includes Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland as well. So that is changing, where the executive is saying that from Monday, if you want to come back, come over to Northern Ireland to see family and friends, for example. There are a lot of people here who have relatives in England who haven't been able to get home, and vice versa. So from Monday, that is going to change. And by extension, really, that means that people who want to come over for a holiday to Northern Ireland, I'm told, will also be able to do that. And remember, all of that guidance around self-isolating for 10 days when you arrived in Northern Ireland, even if it was from Great Britain, that was just guidance. It was never in law. Now, some people will feel that, you know, it's about sticking to the guidance as well as the law, but it's changing. So hopefully, if Barbara does decide to come on holiday very soon, at least maybe the weather will be better for her by the time she decides to come here.
That's one thing I think all of us are hoping for, is better weather. Jane, this next one is from Kate. She's asking, if someone from Northern Ireland flies from an amber list country into England, are they allowed to travel home to Northern Ireland before they begin their isolation period? So I know you mentioned about if you're travelling from red list countries, but what about from amber list countries?
Yes, my understanding is that the amber rules mean that you have to self-isolate at home. There's no requirement to stay in a hotel. So in that sense, then if you're coming from one of those amber places and you're crossing through Dublin or London, then you will then be able to make your way home first to complete your 10 days of self-isolation. But I think that's where those passenger locator forms come in handy, because the contact details you have to provide on there demonstrate or say like where exactly you will be staying, so that health officials can check up with you at some point during the course of your isolation to check that you are there. But you don't need to go to a hotel. You can get home first and complete your quarantine there.
Right, this next question is in from Jordan. Great name, but it's not me. I need to stress that I'm not getting married soon and don't have a question about weddings. But
very
Jordan's
nervous there.
I need to just clear that up in case my mum's watching. But Jordan wants to know the latest on wedding receptions and live music after today's announcement. So wedding receptions were mentioned today, Jane, but that doesn't mean we're fully back to wedding receptions as we knew them, does it?
No, and I suppose that is really difficult for people who have either been trying to plan their wedding reception or have maybe already delayed it a handful of times because of the number of times we've been in and out of lockdown. But you're right. From Monday, wedding receptions will be allowed again, but it's not going to be the dad dancing and kind of all the proper sort of wedding scenes you would have expected a couple of years ago. There will be no live music allowed. We're told that's still a rule. No dancing either, but there will be one dance permitted to pre-recorded music for the happy couple. And then after that, then there will be allowed to be sort of background recorded music at low levels so that people can talk and not shout over each other. So that's what we're being told about that. There's no indication really in terms of when we might see live music permitted again. There are discussions ongoing within the executive with health officials to talk about this, because they're seeing what's happening over in England, where it looks like they're trying to get live music back on a more regular basis, potentially from the 21st of June next month. So there are continuous talks about that. I suppose the one thing we can say is, if you are getting married in the next couple of months, just continue to keep in touch with your vendors and try and continue to see whatever changes on the NI Direct website. That's the government website, which has a lot of information there about weddings. And also whenever we get more information, we'll also try and bring it to people who are trying to plan ahead for the big day.
So it hasn't been forgotten about, but just something to keep an eye on for an update. Laura has been in touch. She's asking about the rules around dining. Her question is, will the rules on outdoor dining remain the same as they are now when indoor dining resumes? So at the minute, we're only allowed to eat in groups of outdoors in groups of up to 6 from a maximum of 2 households. The rules for dining indoors from Monday will allow groups of up to 6 from 6 households. So will the outdoor dining rules be changed, Jane?
Yes, they will. That's definitive. We're told that from Monday, indoor or outdoor hospitality, you'll be allowed to have 6 people from 6 households per table, which is really good news, because we saw when the rule of 6 from 2 households was enforced in the past, kind of the confusion that caused, not only for businesses when they were trying to figure out whether they could ask people to prove that they were from 2 households, but also it restricted contact that people were having with their friends and family. Now we know that given that this is changing, clearly we're in a good situation, and that's why the executive is feeling that it can do this. From Monday that will change as well. So it'll be 6 from 6. The rule of 6 is back.
Right, Jane, before we let you go, let's just take a quick look at some questions that have come in on Facebook. Lindsay is asking, if you're fully vaccinated, do you still need to do a COVID test before going to a green list country?
Yes, you do. Unfortunately, I think people will maybe question why they need to do that when they've had the vaccines and they feel that they've done everything that they were supposed to do and needed to do for things to start opening up again. But the guidance still remains. From our perspective in Northern Ireland, you need to take a COVID test before you arrive here. And also a lot of countries have their own rules about arriving there and what you need to do before you arrive. So you probably need, depending on where you're going, you need to check what they require, because there were other countries who are saying they don't require it. But look at Portugal, for example, it does want a COVID test 72 hours before you arrive. So that's just the guidance at the minute. I think it's a way to try and help us open up international travel. I think at the minute, if you want to go away, it's just something you're going to have to do.
Yeah. Wendy is on Facebook as well, and she's asking, any word yet on when our secondary school children can stop wearing masks in school?
No, actually, I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know if there is a plan maybe being worked on to change that at some point in the future. And we haven't really heard anything from the current Education Minister, Peter Weir, about that in recent weeks, potentially maybe because he may be replaced soon by a new Education Minister within the DUP because of the change of leadership there, and potentially then it might be something we hear about at another stage. But to my knowledge, the health advice around that hasn't changed.
And I don't know about you, Jane, but I feel like masks have become almost such a part of everyday life that I almost forget that I'm wearing it now. Like I even put it on when I'm going outside just to keep my face warm.
It would be good on a day like this. It comes in handy, that's for sure.
I know. Well, Jane, thanks for joining us tonight on Coronavirus Catch Up and answering those questions. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And enjoy next week if you manage to get out and get a booking at a restaurant. But thanks, Jane.
See you there. Bye.
Right, the last topic for tonight is variants. Earlier today, I had a chat with our health correspondent, Mary-Louise Connolly, about the Indian variant and whether it's something that we in Northern Ireland should be concerned about. Mary-Louise, you asked to meet me in a glamorous part of the BBC. This is as good as it's going to get today, I'm afraid.
And because we're keeping to all the rules, it's absolutely freezing in here because the windows are open.
Quite a draft coming in. My ankles are getting a bit cold. But we're here to talk about the Indian variant. Let's get straight to it. I mean, parts of England are now seeing a surge in cases of the Indian variant. What's the situation here in Northern Ireland?
Well, thankfully, still Northern Ireland's figures for the Indian variant are still low. We have been reporting in the BBC since the start of the middle of last week that we have around 15 cases. My understanding is that the figure may have gone up whenever they're published later by maybe a couple, but still definitely fewer than 20. So it is being contained in Northern Ireland, but the Indian variant is here. A lot more cases in the Republic of Ireland, about triple what we have here. The concern is that if it's a lot more transmissible, that number of 15 will increase quite considerably over the next couple of weeks, particularly as we begin to open up more and especially as we begin to travel around a lot more as well. So at the moment it's contained. The problem is we don't know where the cases are because the Public Health Agency won't give us that information. We also don't know if those cases, if those people have been vaccinated. My understanding is that most of them may have received even one jab, but all of that is really uncertain.
Well, just on that, Mary-Louise, is the Department of Health here concerned about the Indian variant and how it may be spreading here, or even how the vaccine may be affected, the vaccine rollout by the Indian variant?
Obviously there's concern. When we see what's happening in Bolton, northwest parts of England, it has really tripled in the last fortnight. Figures have shot up. The only positive side of that is that those figures of cases are not reflected in hospitals. So it's not the same as what was happening last year, where hospitals were being really inundated with very sick people. ICUs were really under extreme pressure. At the moment in Northern Ireland there are only 2 people in ICU. Today we had fewer than 100 positive cases. So those figures aren't being transferred into hospital cases, and that's a good thing. But what we have seen in England are people being vaccinated, that whenever you bring the vaccine to people, particularly the younger age groups, they are very keen to be vaccinated. And we may see that happening here in Northern Ireland, where those hotspots, particularly at Derry, Strabane, also where places perhaps have a lot of factories, where there are people living, a lot of families living perhaps in one house, that they will start targeting those areas in Northern Ireland in order to keep a lid on it.
Well, we're hearing today about lockdown restrictions for next week easing further. We're heading back indoors. Probably a good day to hear that given the weather today. But could these restrictions easing, could that be affected by the Indian variant?
Of course. Any time that we go a little bit further, hopefully next week we'll be able to go inside for a pint and also a meal. So as soon as the restrictions start lifting, it's so easy to start thinking we're back to normal again, when actually we're not. We're going to have maybe families travelling over for weddings. We're going to be going over to England for more sociable events, and you do let your guard down, and maybe unknown to yourself you come in contact with someone who has the Indian variant. it's just like COVID-19 to start all over again. We are reminded it is still out there. If this is more transmissible, which it is, we could bring it back into Northern Ireland or vice versa to the Republic of Ireland. And as the restrictions lift and we're out and about more, we're mixing more, we're travelling more, of course that increases the risk of us getting the Indian variant and it getting an even firmer foothold in Northern Ireland.
So just remain vigilant, and of course obviously the social distancing, the ventilation, the masks will all help.
Yes, it really does, and we are extremely fed up with all of this, but even the advice is to still meet outside where possible. Now let's face it, if you have a choice to meet outside or to go inside someone's house, which we will be able to on Monday as well, you're going to take the latter, aren't you? But even if you're doing that, they're saying if you want to continue enjoying these freedoms, keep the windows open, wash hands, wear your mask where possible, socially distance, because we want these restrictions to remain lifted and to get better as the months go on.
Well, talking about being fed up with restrictions, before we go, any bookings for next week? You heading out anywhere? You going anywhere?
2 weeks time, I was able to get into a restaurant at the start of June. Really looking forward to that. I'm not the type to sit outside.
This is the thing, though, you have to book so many weeks ahead in advance.
But then it's something to look forward to.
Well, this is true.
So the hairdressers is booked.
Tick.
Meal out
Tick.
that night, and we're hopefully going to have a drink in our local bar as well.
Tick there.
On the Armour Road.
So
there's but I want to still be able to do this in September and October.
Yeah.
So as far as I can, I'll be keeping to all the regulations in order to do that.
Marie-Louise, thanks very much for joining us on Coronavirus Catch Up tonight. That was our health correspondent, Marie-Louise Connolly, chatting to me earlier today. Now, just before we go tonight, looking at the latest COVID-19 figures from the Department of Health, no further deaths were reported in the last 24 hours. The death toll remains at 2,152. Another 90 people have tested positive for the virus, and the reproduction, or R number, has remained at between 0.8 to 1.1. And as you've already heard tonight, those aged 25 to 29 are now eligible for their vaccine, and you can book that on the Department of Health's website. Well, that's it from us for this week. Thanks again to our political reporter, Jane McCormick, and our health correspondent, Marie-Louise Connolly, for joining us tonight. Lots of you were in touch with us to send in your questions. Thanks for doing that. We didn't have time to get to them all, but hopefully we've still helped you make sense of what's happening and of what's to come. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC News website, which you'll find at bbc.co.uk/newsni. And you can also follow us on social media as well. If you're watching on Facebook, you'll have found our Facebook page, but we're on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter as well. Just type in BBC News NI when you're on there and you should find us. Now, that's probably our last coronavirus catch up for the next while. We'll be back again as soon as there's something to update you on regarding the pandemic. And as always, we'll be answering any questions you might have about it. And for those of you heading to the South Sandwich Islands that we've been talking about tonight, have a great time. I'll see you later. Stay safe.